Okay, you guys may have seen the actual chart I posted, and I want to go ahead and do a somewhat of a quick walkthrough, uh, going through this information. And we're going to do, of course, a live study that's more detailed, but I want you to have this so that it can be an extra tool to kind of walk you through. I know some of it may be not legible because it's not the most prettiest handwriting, but so that's why I want to walk through it. Okay, so what we have here is the 1843 chart. And this is what the brethren from the Advent movement that fulfilled the first angel's message, they preach from this chart. And we won't go into the deep history of that, but that was the result of a general conference meeting where the Spirit of God had moved upon Charles Fitch a year prior in 1842. And Joseph Bates, who was the chairman over the General Conference Assembly, they decided to go ahead, and this was a unified exposition of the prophetic teachings that are on the 1843 chart. And that's what the brethren taught, and they went forth and fulfilled the first angel's message. So anyway, on this chart, if you notice, we don't have it in front of us, but those that are familiar with the 1843 chart, I posted it enough, and you've probably seen it circulating. They the commencement of the prophetic periods, both on the chart that bring us to 1843, they started in the spring, and they assumed that it was the beginning of the Jewish year. And they commenced both the 677, which was the scattering of the southern kingdom when Manasseh was taken into captivity. And that prophecy actually was based on Isaiah chapter 7, verse 8. And most people want to attribute it specifically to Leviticus 26, and we know why. They want to argue a point. But it's really Isaiah 7, verses 8 and 9, that Ephraim would be broken within 65 years. So, anyway, that was prophesied by Isaiah in 742 BC. And 742 BC minus 65 takes us to 677 BC, which happens to be when Manasseh was taken into captivity. And that can be proven by various sources. So here you have the assumption, the spring, and you go forward 7 times or 2,520 years. And it takes us to 1843. Okay. And then you have 457 spring BC, which 2,300 years later took them to 1843. And so they did not teach the actual day and hour that the Messiah was coming, but they taught the year. And they, based on these calculations, believed that the Messiah was to return to the earth to cleanse the sanctuary by the year end of 1843. So any time period during that year, they believed that the Messiah would come and cleanse the sanctuary. So now there's a quote taken from the Spirit of Prophecy, and this is one of the places here. It's also in early writings, and it was written in 1850. And basically, these points are brought out. She states that the figures were as God wanted them, and we're going to find why the figures on the chart were as God wanted them, and that they were not to remove or alter any of those figures. God's hand was over and hid a mistake in some, not all, of the figures, so that none could see it until his hand was removed. Now, when it talks about God hiding, putting his hand in over a mistake, he simply did not intervene to override this, what we're going to find later, the mistake that's identified. He didn't send an angel. He didn't give anyone a dream or a vision to see this mistake. Now, if we go farther here, notice in this statement that is made in the Spirit of Prophecy, the mistake is singular. It's not mistakes. And you'll hear men, again, who are seeking to argue, they will make this plural and give the insinuation that there's multiple mistakes. But the Spirit of Prophecy quote clearly states a mistake. And then it speaks of figures, plural. So this one mistake affected some of the figures, plural. Now, we're going to find that they had identified the mistake by the time we get over here to the 7-month movement. And we're going to look at that in just a moment. So this is not something that was corrected 10, 20 years later. This was corrected almost a short period of time after the year 1843 came to its end. So now, here is the mistake in reckoning. It was the spring commencement. Again, that's going to affect the ending date. Here are the figures reflecting the singular mistake in reckoning. Spring 677 BC, spring 457 BC brings us to the year 1843. And they believe by the beginning or the end of 1843, the Messiah must come. Okay? Now, interesting enough, it's important that these things in this chart that it not be tampered with, because we're going to find that the Bible years ago, during the time of Habakkuk and Daniel, had prophesied that the brethren were actually going to commence from the spring, and therefore it would bring them to a time period in which would create a waiting time or a tarrying time. So in Habakkuk 2, those of you that are familiar, it says, write the vision, and it says, though it tarry, wait for it, because it will surely come, it will not tarry. That prophecy could not have been fulfilled if the mistake in which they made, if God had intervened and overridden that mistake before they carried it out. Okay, so let's get that clear. So that's what's being spoken of in the Spirit of Prophecy quote. She is not dealing with the actual numbers used to calculate, or she's not dealing with the duration of years. She's not dealing with the 2520 to 2300. She's not dealing with the 1290 to 1260, any of those time periods. She's simply dealing with the mistake, singular, that had affected the figures. And these are the figures in which it affected. Okay, so now this chart brings us to the end of the year 1843, which is the spring of 1844. Spring being the first month of the Jewish year. That was a tarrying time. Now we know that Daniel 12 speaks of a blessing to those that waiteth when they come to the tarrying or waiting time. And we're going to see that that brings us into the 7th-month movement. And we have the bridegroom tarrying, which is brought out in Matthew chapter 25, verse 5. But notice in Matthew 25, verse 6, when we have what is referred to as the midnight cry, the virgins had trimmed their lamps. They got rid of that part of error in their previous calculation. And therefore the light was burning bright. And a cry went out, behold, the bridegroom cometh. This was calculated by a gentleman by the name of Samuel Snow, July 21st, during the summer of 1844. They went back and based on their study of Leviticus chapter 23, and also them looking again at the actual decree and the time in which Manasseh went into captivity, they realized that it occurred in the autumn, that it was the 7th year of Artaxerxes, which would take place in the autumn, not in the spring. This then now would bring them correctly when they go forward 2,520 years, it would take them to the autumn of 1844. When they went forward 2,300 years, it brought them to the autumn of 1844. So now they had an exact date, month, and year in which the bridegroom would come. And now they had corrected the mistake, singular, that was in the former reckoning, starting in the spring. Now, here goes the second quote by Ellen White in early writings, that men are taking these two quotes and they're confusing the people by trying to insinuate that the mistake was actually with the calculations, something with the 2520 or some other prophecy on the chart, when really it was identified and corrected by the brethren here. So notice here, they were correct in their, I'm taking, these points that are from the quotes, early writings, page 243.2. They were correct in their reckoning of the prophetic periods. So their calculation was correct. The same time period, if you notice, that they used here, minus the commencement time, they used over here. Now notice, the mistake consisted in not understanding what the sanctuary was and the nature of its cleansing. So when they came to this period here, when they were brought to the actual correct year and month and day in which the 2300 and the 2520 years would end, they now mistook the sanctuary and the nature of its cleansing. They thought it was the earth. So that's what she's talking about here in this quote. Again, she's not attacking any of the prophetic periods in which they were using to calculate. Now, they found no mistake in their former reckoning of the prophetic periods. Now, when you go back and read this, you'll find God showed her that there was no mistake in their reckoning of the prophetic periods. And they themselves went back and they studied this and they found no mistake in their reckoning of the prophetic periods. Now the mistake was in the event and the nature of the cleansing of the sanctuary. Now watch this. The mistake is then corrected in the figures. They corrected that over here. And there was no more mistake in the reckoning or calculation. So here we go. The autumn of 677 BC is corrected. The autumn of 457 BC is corrected. And now the autumn of 1844 AD is now the true date in which the bridegroom would come. So their mistake was in the event and the sanctuary and its cleansing. So now that sums up the 1843 chart. Now, when you get to the 1850 chart, you'll find these same calculations are still used, except now they have went back, they have studied and measured the temple, and they now see that the sanctuary to be cleansed and the bridegroom coming was not to the earth, but he came to the Ancient of Days. He left from the holy place and went into the holiest of holies to begin the day of judgment, or Yom Kippur, in order to blot out the sins of Israel during the times of refreshing. So all of this in her statements have nothing to do with the 2520, the 2300, the 508, the 538, the 1335, the 1290, the 1260, the August 11th, 1840, the 1299, the 1449, and the 1840. It has nothing to do with any of those prophetic periods. Do not allow men to mislead you. Go back and look at it for yourself. And you take this in this little video and explanation. You go back to the post in which I put there. Go through it yourself and actually read the Spirit of Prophecy quotes, and you will see that this is consistent. God wants the 1843 chart to remain as it is, so that we can go back and see how our brethren fulfilled the first angel's message, which was the proclamation of prophetic time, and it brought them to the tarrying time or waiting time, then to the 7th-month movement, which is the parable of the 10 virgins, all the way up until the bridegroom came to the Ancient of Days. The temple of God was opened in heaven, and the ark of his covenant was seen. This was a fulfillment of Daniel chapter 7, verses 9 through 13. And now the Son of Man is brought to the Ancient of Days, and the Father has given all judgment unto his Son. And when that work of investigative judgment or the Day of Atonement is complete, he gives them also authority to execute judgment. And that's the simplicity of this study. And that's why we are here to correct the misrepresentation that has been brought about by men that are not honestly going back and looking to make sure that what they're being told is accurate. Now, we know these things because we have obeyed the Spirit of Prophecy that said that we must go back and we must receive the first, second, and third angels' messages from those whom God gave it to. And we have done that prayerfully, and therefore our understanding has been enlightened concerning all of these things the Spirit of God has showed us. Be blessed, and I hope this little video helps until we do our live together, and we'll go through it even more thoroughly. Be blessed.
My heart was cold, lukewarm was I, when lo I heard the midnight cry. I love to